It was the 75th Annual Academy Awards. The show was following the previous year, in which A Beautiful Mind was the big winner that night with 4 Oscar wins, including Best Picture and Best Director for Ron Howard. However, like we discussed in our previous video, the ceremony was notable for the field of animation, as it was the first year where Best Animated Feature was presented. Shrek would win the award in a race with Monsters, Inc. Jimmy Neutron and Boy Genius never stood a chance. That was too close for pundits to call. While many agreed that Shrek was more than a worthy winner for the first Oscar in this category, there were some grumblings that it was surprising that the film from Disney didn't take home the prize. After all, Disney had been pioneering animation for years at this point, so for them to lose the first Oscar for Best Animated Feature to the company that their former head of animation, Jeffrey Katzenberg, formed, well, let's just say that the public loved the irony and it likely ruffled some feathers inside the House of Mouse. But there was always the second year to look forward to, and this time Disney was going to go all in on winning the prize. This year there would be 16 movies eligible for Best Animated Feature, which meant for the first time there would be 5 nominees in the category. However, this would again cause some controversy because unlike the previous year, in which there were some notable snubs, movies that did not get nominations included things like Hey Arnold the Movie, Jonah a VeggieTales Movie, and Adam Sandler's 8 Crazy Nights. While a couple of these movies are fine, to call them snubs would be a bit of a stretch. Even Stuart Little 2 was eligible for the award, as Sony successfully made their case that the movie was more of a cartoon than it was a live-action film, an argument that many outside observers questioned. Ultimately, when the 5 nominations were announced, there were a couple choices that didn't seem all that impressive and worthy of an Oscar nomination. This was also the year where the Academy changed the recipient of the award from being given to the producer to being given to a combination of the director and producer. While this new rule was considered an improvement over the previous year, it did result in some co-directors being left off the nominees list, and one film whose sole nomination was the producer, with both directors getting snubbed. It appeared that one of the rules was that only one person could receive the nomination, and that it would be up to the studio to figure out which one that would be. Obviously, this was a major problem with almost everyone, and the next year would finally settle on awarding the directors first, with the producer also being the nominees if they contributed enough to the production, though some directors could still be left out if the main director was responsible for a larger portion of the direction than the others. I know, it's all very confusing and a clear example of how political the Oscars can be. But with everything put in place, 5 films were chosen as the nominees, and we will discuss them in alphabetical order like we usually do. The first nomination was Ice Age, a computer animated film from 20th Century Fox that got good reviews and even better box office results. The story of 3 prehistoric animals who go on a journey to return a human baby to his tribe was nothing revolutionary by any stretch of the imagination, but it had fun characters, a lot of jokes to laugh at, and a prehistoric squirrel who wanted nothing more than to eat his acorn. And this squirrel would go on to become the unofficial mascot for the relatively new Blue Sky Studios. Though few felt the movie would win, it was a serviceable filler nomination. The second nominee would be Disney's Lilo and Stitch, a 2D animated film in which an alien falls to Earth and befriends a little girl in Hawaii. With a soundtrack composed of Elvis tunes rather than original songs, though to be sure there were a few of those as well, the movie was a sleeper hit for 2D animation in a market that was largely rewarding computer animation more and more. And with relatable themes of getting through family tragedy and finding love for one another even when your family isn't perfect, the movie was a hit with critics and audiences, and Disney was personally betting big on this being their big winner that night. After winning the previous year with Shrek, DreamWorks was back in the race with Spirit, Stallion of the Cimarron, another 2D animated film. This movie followed a horse and the many adventures he goes on in the Wild West. Being DreamWorks' first G-rated animated film, the movie was a minor box office hit with critics, finding it harmless but unmemorable. Interestingly, neither director Kelly Ashburn nor Lauren Cook were nominated for directing this film. The sole nomination went to Jeffrey Katzenberg, the producer of the film. Although there was no public statement from anyone in the industry on this, I personally felt that it would have made for a very awkward speech if Spirit had won. This, however, wasn't the only Spirit in the race, as the fourth nomination went to Hayao Miyazaki's Spirited Away from Studio Ghibli. For most of the year, it was questioned whether or not this movie would even get a US release, as Disney had previously decided not to release any more Ghibli films after the box office failure of Princess Mononoke, a failure, I need to add, which was entirely Disney's fault. However, the studio had many admirers at Pixar, most notably John Lasseter and Pete Docter, and Pixar was allowed to handle the dubbing of the film, which was enough for Disney to acquire it. Upon release, the film was lauded by critics as one of the best animated films of the decade, as well as one of the best films of the year. Lasseter was so impressed with it that he persuaded Disney to invest in a 4-year consideration campaign to get the film nominated for Oscars and other categories like Best Score, Best Screenplay, and Best Picture. Ultimately, Best Animated Feature would be the sole nomination the film would receive. Rounding out the 5 nominees would be Disney's other big release of the year, Treasure Planet. This science fiction retelling of the classic novel Treasure Island was a passion project for directors Ron Clements and John Musker, the directors of previous Disney hits like The Little Mermaid and Aladdin, though Clements was the sole nominee for some reason. The film was a technical marvel but received more lukewarm reviews from critics, who mostly felt that the sci-fi coat of paint was more distracting to the story than it was compelling. The movie also was a huge box office failure, whose loss was so huge that it destroyed all of the goodwill Lilo and Stitch had built up and started the process of Disney moving on from 2D animation altogether. When the dust settled and the nominees were announced, it was pretty clear that this was going to be a 2-horse race. Neither Ice Age or Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron were anywhere near good enough to win the top prize, and Treasure Planet was too much of a flop for Disney to put their marketing weight behind it. So it was going to come down to Lilo and Stitch and Spirited Away, which were the 2 best reviewed films of the 5. Of these 2, critics were not shy about what they felt should win.
If this movie doesn't win the Academy Award for Best Animated Film, I think the voters who don't select it owe us an explanation. It's far and away the best animated film of the year.
I totally agree. I would just like to repeat what you just said, because, you know, in that new animated category, there's a lot of pressure to get American animated films in there, and Miyazaki is really the world master.
Absolutely.
But while critics were positive that Spirited Away should win, it wasn't really going to be so simple. One of the main problems was Disney itself. While not spoken out loud, internally it was widely known that Disney really wanted Lilo and Stitch to win this award. The thought of DreamWorks winning a second time was something that management at Disney couldn't stand, and they now had a film that was certainly good enough to beat Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron. However, Disney was also distributing Spirited Away. While you might think Disney would treat both films equally, the truth is they were only distributing Spirited Away, and probably wouldn't even have done that if Lasseter and Docter hadn't asked them to. Financially, Disney wouldn't reap nearly as much money from this film, and the Oscar would go to a film that they may have distributed, but they didn't contribute to in any creative or financial way. So even if Spirited Away won the Oscar, Disney wouldn't get the credit for it. Still, their film division head Dick Cook promised that if Spirited Away won the award, they would delay a planned April 15th release date for the DVD and expand the film in theaters, giving it a wide release for the first time after it was only seen in limited release. Obviously, with that clip, you know we're going to be circling back around to that comment. But it was true. Disney had no real incentive to fight for Spirited Away to win, which meant the movie had to be its own champion. The final problem the film had is that Disney never put the film out into wide release, and marketing was kept to a bare minimum, so most viewers didn't even know what the movie was. Oh, and there was some concern about Spirited Away having a similar name to Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron, which led some people to wonder if older voters might accidentally vote for the horse movie, and we could have a surprise come Oscar night. Ultimately, though, it was understood that this was an award for Disney to lose. When Oscar night came around, there were 2 foregone conclusions. Chicago would win the top prize for Best Picture, and Lilo and Stitch was going to take Best Animated Feature. In a surprise move, Best Animated Feature was the first award presented that night, with Cameron Diaz presenting the award and giving a speech about how kids take their parents to animated films, a comment that largely went unnoticed at the time, but would be repeated later and receive more backlash.
It is my honor to present the first Oscar of the evening. Once upon a time, parents took their children to see animated features. Today's animation has reached such a level of sophistication that the children take their parents.
After the introduction, she opened the envelope to announce the winner.
And the Oscar goes to, let's see, Spirited Away.
And just like that, the unthinkable happened. Spirited Away, a movie most viewers weren't familiar with, beat Lilo and Stitch, the Disney movie that was beloved by everyone, for the second Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. A movie most people hadn't seen, had been left out to dry by its distributor, won the top award in a category Disney desperately wanted to win. Oh, and they weren't the only ones either. After Spirited Away won the Oscar, the camera cut over to Jeffrey Katzenberg briefly, who was clearly not happy that his film lost. Not only was this a big deal for anime as an accepted art form in America, this was the first win that critics could honestly point to and say the award was legitimate. That the award was not some corporate token prize to major animation studios, that Best Animated Feature could exist to highlight animation as a true art form. Alright, that's a bit of a sneak preview of what's to come in this series, but at the time, these were the thoughts everyone had. And the best part is that Spirited Away would get an expanded theatrical release and new marketing power from Disney, right? Well, remember when Dick Cook made the promise to delay the DVD release of the film? Well, that was a lie. While Spirited Away did get an expansion of up to 800 theaters, when it came to the DVD release, Dick Cook simply said that the DVD would come out as scheduled.
What a dick!
No elaboration, no praise for the film winning the award, and Disney being happy they could distribute this wonderful film. Nothing. Their silence and indifference towards the win showed what Disney truly felt about the situation, and their inability to capitalize on what should have been an easy financial win to me showed that they were personally insulted that their film lost. Ignoring the bruised egos and corporate politics, though, how did Spirited Away manage to win the top prize over Lilo and Stitch? Here are the 4 reasons why. Number 1, Spirited Away was more loved by critics.
Our next movie is quite simply a masterpiece. It's Spirited Away, and this is one of the year's best films.
It's an amazing piece of work.
While critics may have liked Lilo and Stitch, they loved Spirited Away. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that critics votes for the Oscars, and there is no hard evidence that critics even shaped the award race. But you must keep in mind that this movie popped up on a lot of critics' top 10 films of the year list. It also had a 100% rating on the, at the time, still fairly new Rotten Tomatoes website. Getting 100% on Rotten Tomatoes is still very rare these days, but at the time, it was one of only a handful of movies to receive this. All of this reception may not have swayed voters, but it likely pushed them to watch their screeners of the film, and once you see a great movie, you can't unsee it. Number 2. Hayao Miyazaki is revered by animators. While animators may have respected the other directors and producers nominated in this category, the reality is that animators outright worship Miyazaki. Miyazaki is the man who inspired virtually all the animators at Pixar, and while they may respect their peers, they were the group most likely to vote for Miyazaki and push the film out to other voters. Number 3. The Academy voters aren't from Florida. Alright, this is probably more of a joke than anything, and it also goes to show that yes, I was around at the time, but the fact that most of the Academy voters were not from Florida and thus wouldn't confuse Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron with Spirited Away, well, that was probably another factor. For those of you who have no idea what I'm joking about, look up Hanging Chad. It's an interesting story. And number 4, Spirited Away was a better film. Although some of you may think, well, duh, of course it was the better film, you have to remember that the Oscars aren't always about what's best in the field. Things like campaigning, marketing, the political climate at the time, and the old favorite overdue story can all contribute to a winning narrative. In many of these scenarios, Lilo and Stitch had a clear advantage over Spirited Away. Yet in the end, Spirited Away was just so good that voters could not deny it. If Spirited Away lost, then the category would be considered useless, and there was no way it could afford that kind of stigma in the second year of existence. Overall, this is considered one of the best wins for Best Animated Feature. The only thing that marred the whole experience is that the Oscars this year took place shortly after the Iraq War invasion, and Miyazaki decided not to attend in protest. I feel it would have been a great speech, but I am also unsurprised that he took this stance considering the pacifist views in all of his movies. With 2003 having come and gone, though, it was time to look forward to the next year, and join me next month as I look at why Finding Nemo won Best Animated Feature at the 76th Annual Academy Awards. I'll see you then.
Hey, you made it to the end. Thank you so much for making it to the end. Just a few more things. First of all, the names that you see on the screen, these are our Patreon and YouTube member supporters. And I thank each and every one of them. Their support helps me make exclusive videos for Patreon and YouTube members, as well as keep the channel running. And of course, is just of huge kindness to me. Also, don't forget to check out the iCritic-led podcast on Spotify, Apple, Google, Deezer, whatever podcasting service you listen to. It is there. We definitely want to see you there. And hey, there's also other videos that you can check out. So, you know, check out these other channels, these other videos, especially that one. I think that's a really good one.